In the endless expanses of the savanna, where golden grass sways under the hot sun, there once ruled a mighty lion named Asaf. His mane, thick and dark red like flames, was a symbol of his power. His roar made the earth tremble, and his gaze struck fear into even the bravest predators. But time spares no one. The years dried up his body, his teeth wore down, his claws dulled. Young lions, full of strength, challenged Asaf, and having defeated him, expelled him from the pride. Left to his own devices, he wandered alone, an outcast, once a king, now a shadow of his former greatness. The savanna, so familiar and dear to him, became hostile to Asaf. He could no longer hunt large animals, his strength fading with each passing day. Sometimes he managed to catch small prey, a hare or a bird, but more often than not he went hungry. His ribs showed through his dull, matted fur, and his eyes, once burning with fire, were now dull. Asaf lived alone, hearing only the whisper of the wind and the distant cries of hyenas, which, as if sensing his weakness, followed him closely. One cool morning, when the fog still lay on the grass, Asaf noticed a small antelope that had strayed from the herd. Its thin legs trembled, and its eyes were full of fear. This was his chance, perhaps his last. The lion gathered his remaining strength, tensed his muscles, and began to creep forward, trying not to make a sound. Every step was torture, but hunger drove him forward. When the distance closed, Asaf leaped, putting everything he had left into the jump. The antelope screamed, her voice echoing across the plain, but before Asaf could close his jaws, the ground shook from the pounding of hooves. A herd of antelopes, led by a mighty male, appeared from behind the hill. Their horns glistened in the morning light, and their eyes burned with determination. The male lunged at the lion, striking him in the side with his horns. Asaf roared in pain, but his voice was weak and hoarse. Another blow, and he lost his balance, falling to the ground. The antelope broke free and ran away, while the herd continued to press the lion, striking him repeatedly. Asaf, bleeding profusely, struggled to his feet and limped away, leaving a trail of scarlet drops behind him. Wounded and weakened, Asaf wandered aimlessly, unaware that the savanna had given way to sparse bushes and then to dusty trails. He did not know that he was approaching a small town called Kariba, where people lived side by side with wildlife. Exhaustion and pain clouded his mind, and soon he found himself on a deserted street surrounded by low buildings. The residents of Kariba, seeing the huge but emaciated lion, froze. Children ran screaming to their homes, while adults stood still, not knowing how to react. Asaf paid no attention to them. His steps were heavy, his mane hung in tatters, and blood was still oozing from his wounds. He stopped in front of a small building with a sign depicting cats, dogs, and birds. It was the Bright Path Veterinary Clinic. Inside the clinic, the usual hustle and bustle reigned. A young girl named Lena, who had come with a sick parrot, was sitting in the reception area when the door slowly opened, and Asaf appeared in the doorway. His claws scratched quietly on the linoleum, and his hoarse breathing filled the room. Lena screamed, dropping the cage with the parrot, which immediately began to scream loudly. Amir, a middle-aged veterinarian with kind eyes, and his assistant Sophia froze behind the counter. For a moment, time stood still. Amir was the first to recover. "Don't move," he said quietly but firmly, gesturing for Lena to retreat to the back door. The girl, trembling, grabbed the cage and hid in the back room. Sophia, without taking her eyes off the lion, dialed the local ranger's number. Asaf, seemingly oblivious to the commotion, sank heavily to the floor. His tongue hung out, and his half-closed eyes stared into space. A crowd of curious onlookers gathered outside, but no one dared to come closer. A few minutes later, a siren sounded, and a ranger jeep pulled up to the clinic. Cod, an experienced ranger with sun-bleached hair and a calm gaze, got out of the car. Two of his colleagues followed him. Cod had entered the clinic, assessed the situation, and noticing the lion's emaciated condition, decided not to use tranquilizers. "He's not dangerous," he said quietly. He needs help, not fear. The rangers carefully threw a sturdy net over SF. The lion growled weakly, but did not resist. His eyes seemed to express not anger but weary resignation. He was placed in a metal cage in the back of a jeep, and the crowd that had gathered around burst into applause. The vehicle headed for the Naguni Reserve, a place where wild animals found shelter and protection. A team of veterinarians was waiting for SF at the reserve. They took him to the operating room, where they began to examine him under light anesthesia. Dr. Nia, the lead veterinarian, frowned when she saw his condition. SF's teeth were almost completely worn down. His gums were inflamed, and the wounds from the antelope's horns had become infected. An ultrasound showed that his internal organs had suffered from prolonged starvation, and his bones had become brittle. He won't survive in the wild, Nia said quietly, shaking her head. Cod, standing by the glass door of the operating room, clutched his hat in his hands. He looked at the lion and remembered stories about the kings of the savanna who once inspired fear. Maybe he was looking for us, whispered one of the nurses. Looking for those who could help. These words silenced everyone, and the room fell silent, filled with respect for the old warrior. Veterinarians treated his wounds and administered antibiotics and nutritional solutions. Asafa was covered with a warm blanket, under which his emaciated body slowly began to warm up. He was placed in a spacious enclosure built especially for him. The enclosure was surrounded by trees, and heating and surveillance cameras were installed inside. The lion was named Modi, which meant survivor in the local language. Modi rarely left his corner of the enclosure. He was fed soft food that he could chew without pain. Rangers and reserve staff came to see him every day, talking to him as if he were an old friend. Cade became a regular visitor, bringing a warm blanket and telling Modi about life in the savanna, which he still seemed to dream about. Sometimes Modi would lift his head, listening to the familiar voice, but his eyes no longer sparkled. He lived quietly, surrounded by care, and every day was a small victory for him. The people at the reserve loved him, seeing him not just as an old lion, but as a symbol of fortitude and dignity. One morning, when the sun was just beginning to light up the savanna, Modi did not wake up. His body lay still, as if he had finally found peace. Cade, seeing him, stood silently for a long time, then took off his hat and said quietly, "Farewell, old king." Modi was buried under an old acacia tree in the heart of the reserve. The words Modi, the surviving king, found peace among people, were engraved on a small stone. Modi's story spread throughout the Kariba and beyond. People talked about the old lion who came to them for help and found it. His story became a legend, a reminder that even in weakness there is strength, and in compassion there is salvation. The Gundi Reserve became a place where people came to honor Modi's memory and learn more about wildlife conservation. Every year on the anniversary of his death, Cade and the reserve staff gathered at the acacia tree to remember Modi. They talked about how one old lion had changed their outlook on life, reminding them that even the most powerful can need help, and the weakest can need love. Thank you for reading this story. If it touched your heart, please share it and support our work so that we can tell even more stories about animal rescue.